Hello and welcome back to the Motorsport Baithak podcast. I'm your host DD and joining me once again is my friend and your co-host Vedant. On this episode, we will be talking about alternate race weekend formats for Formula 1. So let's grab some chai, take our seats, ready our opinions and dive right into the conversation. Hello Vedant. I am so excited for our conversation today. I have been waiting for this episode for over a month and we're finally here and I can't wait to tell you all the ideas that I have about what Formula 1 can do to make the race weekends even more interesting, to make the racing even more spicy.
Absolutely, Divya. It's great to be back here, and we have been building up to this episode for a while now. We have mentioned this episode in a few of our other podcasts, and it's going to be a very fun conversation, very interesting conversation, very productive conversation. And I don't know if anyone from the management from the FOM listens to us, but if they do, they'll have some ideas. They'll get some ideas from us. But one thing's for sure, we'll get some great ideas, and it will be great food for thought for our listeners. And they can also, comment in the comment section below and have a discussion amongst themselves.
Exactly, and that's what I want our listeners to do. Keep an open mind. We're not saying that this is what Formula One should do, but we're definitely throwing out some wild ideas out there that might bear fruit or might be interesting enough for a discussion between us and you. So before we get into it though, let's just like put it out there, like what is it that Formula One and us as fans are trying to achieve by trying out different race weekend formats.
So yeah, I guess firstly, when we watch racing, when we watch motorsports, the one thing we want is action. Like as simple as that. We want racing. We want to see cars go head to head, cars go bumper to bumper, and wheel to wheel, depending on the different racing series. But I guess, yeah, as I said, action is very important in any sort of motorsport and in any sort of race. So if, in my opinion, if a car starts at the front and it is the fastest car and it goes on to win the race without any interruption, any disturbance from behind, because every car behind is so slow a car. So that is not action, that is not fun, and that is what we have had in Formula One for a long time now.
Exactly. We want to make the races more memorable. We want more excitement. And what makes a race exciting? What makes a race memorable? It is the fact that whoever wins the race, whoever does well in the race, has a story. It's not, like you said, it's not a simple outright win from pole. Usually they either have to fight really hard for the win, or they come through the field from the back of the grid, or there's changing conditions. Um, or something goes wrong in the race for them, but they still come back and they still win, and that's what makes the race memorable. And what we're trying to do with the race alternate race weekend format is basically create more of these races a little bit inorganically, but do so for the sake of the fans, for the sake of the sport. And I'm all for it. I am all for it. Now there's another thing that complicates this debate, because there's a lot of other racing series, especially like in motorbikes, motocross and stuff like that, and even like a 100-meter dash where all the participants start have like the same starting conditions. You start on the same line. There's no difference where you start or what your deficit is. Um, but that can't be the case in Formula 1 or like a lot of other racing series. We can't do that. We can't have 20 cars line up. And also, as a Formula 1 fan myself, a lot of people would call this like a purist thought, but I don't want to punish success either. But I want to create a way where we can have more exciting racing, where we can still give a fighting chance to those who don't have the best car, to teams who don't have like they're not the best on the grid technologically, without creating a scenario where the worst team gets the short end of the stick.
Yeah, absolutely. Punishing success is not the Formula One way. And as we mentioned in a previous episode, Formula One has never used balance of performance to regulate the grid, and that is not a direction Formula One wants to go. Because at the end of the day, we are the pinnacle of motorsport. Formula One is the pinnacle of motorsport, and if you restrict that performance, even within the regulations, that is not something the fans or the teams or the drivers will enjoy. So I think that's very clear that we don't want to use a balance of performance kind of way.
Exactly, and the biggest hurdle that's not allowing F1 to race wheel to wheel is the fact that the cars are having a tough time following, which I hope we'll overcome in 2022. But that is not stopping us from trying out new things to make the sport more interesting. So, um, yeah, let's dive into it. Let's go over all the previous race formats that F1 has been through, because I know a lot of purists say this qualifying format is the best format ever. There's not no need to change it. It and so on and so forth. But Formula One has tried out a variety of different qualifying formats as we know it. So let's go through them. Let's see what Formula One has done in the past, and if let's see if there's something that we can learn from it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Formula One started in 1950, but Grand Prix racing has been a part of motorsport world long before that. And the pre-war Grand Prix, in the pre-war Grand Prix, the grids were based on a lottery system. So it did not matter if you were the fastest car or if you were the slowest car. They were based on the lottery system. So in today's terms, Lewis Hamilton in his Mercedes, in his all-conquering Mercedes, can start P18, and George Russell can start P2, P1.
Absolutely, and that's totally based on chance.
And it is the most pure thing in a way because it is completely random.
Exactly, but is that what we really want though? Not in my opinion. I would still want like a qualifying session to take place before the race. I think a qualifying section has its own excitement, has its own competitiveness, not only just between the drivers but also between the teams to show who's got the fastest car out there. And I would not want to do away.
Obviously. And Saturday qualifying is a important aspect of the weekend. And at the same time, today's cars are way faster than the 1950 cars, the 1940s cars, in fact. And we can't have the lottery system right now, but
Exactly. But well, Grand Prix racing moved on after that, after the war, and between 1950 and 1995, that's 45 years. That's a long time. Formula One stuck to a two-session quali on Friday and Saturday, with the fastest overall time getting pole. Now, obviously, you could have varying weather conditions on Friday and Saturday, which would kind of mean that if you did well when the conditions were good, you would get to start ahead compared to the other people. However, it did give the teams two chances to basically get ahead of the others. What are your thoughts on the qualifying format from 1995?
yeah, I think till 1995, the two session format, I think it didn't create a lot of excitement because there was no one set session and there was no proper time limit as such. All you had to do was look at the leaderboards at the end of Saturday. So essentially, the Friday session, while it did count towards your time, and if it rained on Saturday, the Friday session, the times on Friday were your fastest times. But it didn't create a lot of excitement amongst the fans, and
I mean, but it doesn't rain a lot often.
it didn't create a need of urgency within the teams.
Exactly. And no one's gonna really watch it. Like the audience won't enjoy it unless there's a sense of competitiveness throughout the session. Unless people are trying to beat each other the entire time. But again, F1 moved on from that in 1996, thankfully.
Yeah.
Until 2002, there was a single 1 hour session in which drivers had a maximum of 12 laps to set the best time they could. Again, not the most exciting way to do it. And we saw during that period that a lot of teams sat out um, the time. They didn't go out on track for like most of like the first half of the session until conditions became optimal, and until they had a few cars on track that because no one wants to go out on track when it is green. People always want to be on track at the best time possible, which is when a few cars have been out and then there's more grip on the track and things like that. So I don't think there's a lot to take away from that qualifying format that F1 used back in the day.
Yeah, so even today we see this sort of philosophy being used. The teams don't go out initially during the qualifying and they stay back, like especially the teams further up the grid, McLarens and the Mercedes. They wait for the Williams and the Haas's to go out and lay down some rubber, and then they go out. So imagine this on a like
On a 1 hour calling session with the audience having to wait for at least I'd say 45 minutes of it.
exactly.
Yep. and then Formula One trialed the one lap quali between 2003 and 2005. So you first run the first qualifying session in the championship order, and then the second run would be in the first runs order, um, which it's a little confusing, but you can get the idea of it. But I don't think like it made a huge difference because if you went in the championship order in the first run, right? Maybe due to the track condition and the track being green, the championship leader might end up towards the back of the grid, or like towards the back of the rankings after the first qualifying session. But then he would get to go uh, later on in the second session and again have a better track condition and post a faster time. So I don't know how it worked in favor of mixing up the grid, but we've seen a few cases where Schumacher spun out intentionally in the first run to get an advantageous position in second run, and you don't want that to happen. You don't want teams to not send out their drivers during the qualifying session just so that they can have a favorable position in the second session. Just beats the whole um, you know the whole essence of having a qualifying session or having two qualifying sessions.
There were flaws in that system, and as we pointed out, and Formula One moved ahead. And for 2005, they had the aggregate times. So the times from both the runs were aggregated and made into one single time, which created the championship order. Which, in my opinion, is a much better way to do it if you are doing one lap quali, because
I mean, it definitely forces the team to go teams to go out and do their one lap run or like post a time at least.
yeah, and do the best they can, because both the times get added. And then again we moved ahead. 2006, from 2006 to 2009, we had a different format now, because in those times refueling was allowed. So Formula One had a three-part quali in which you had to use essentially your race fuel, like the full amount of fuel, I think. And
You have to qualify with the same amount of fuel you would start with in the race. So you wouldn't refuel before the race. You would refuel during the race.
exactly, yeah. So that created a sense of strategy. So if you wanted to start on a higher load in race, or higher fuel load in the race, you had to qualify with a higher fuel load, which means your lap times would be slower. And if you qualified with a lower fuel load, you might have to, you know, pit for fuel earlier in the race. So that created a lot of strategy, and that I think was fun while it lasted. But as we know, in 2010, Formula One banned refueling, so that went out of the window. In
Exactly. And then sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was coming to the next change, which Bernie Ecclestone pushed through in 2016, which a lot of fans and a lot of teams were absolutely against. It was a very strange system with elimination qualifying basically. So you go out. There were three phases. You go out in the Q1. After a few minutes, every 90 seconds, the driver in last used to get eliminated, and it lasted only 6 races, because it was not the most exciting qualifying format to watch.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like it was built upon the current qualifying format that we have, since 2010, where you have Q1, Q2, and Q1, Q2, and Q3, and there's elimination at the end of each round. But by the time you got to the end of any of those qualifying sessions, you would know, who the last two drivers are competing for, the first place or the 10th place or like, the 15th place. And that took away from the excitement of the whole session and of, drivers beating each other's time like they do now at the drop of the flag, after the checkered flag has been waved.
Exactly.
And that took away from that, which is, and I am totally for the current qualifying session. I think I love it. It's very exciting. I think this Formula One came to a great place with this qualifying session, but we do need to look forward to make the racing more exciting because what is happening right now is the fastest car qualifies first, and from there they start ahead in the race, and it becomes very easy, especially when you have a dominant car like Mercedes on the grid, for them to run away with the race. And basically just race themselves and no one else on the grid.
Yeah, absolutely. Formula One, the as you said, the current qualifying session is an absolute gem right now, and it creates a lot of excitement at the drop of the flag, especially. But we need a more holistic approach to the entire weekend.
Exactly, exactly. Which is why I know we've given the current announcement from Formula One about having a sprint race or like a super qualifying on Saturday, and there's been a knee-jerk reaction from the community and even from us about how this is allowing teams to how it is allowing teams who have a better car to get more points over the weekend, and it's essentially giving them more time to get to a position where they can win every Sunday race from, right? Even if they have a bad qualifying, they can make up places over Saturday and then start ahead on Sunday and things as such. But what we are forgetting is F1 has still hasn't finalized all the rules regarding how the weekend format will work, and the qualifying and the sprint race is not the only variable in the format. We are forgetting variables such as, again, fuel loads, and even though refueling is not a part of racing in Formula One anymore, tires are,
Yeah,
and I think F1 can still do a lot with tires that would spice up the race weekend, the Saturday races and the Sunday races. And I was thinking about that the other day, and what if you were allowed, what if the Pirelli gave open reign for the teams to choose their own tires, but suppose you weren't allowed to race on Sunday with the tires you chose for the Saturday sprint race, maybe because the sprint race is half distance, and if
a
someone's using
third
like a
distance.
medium tire, they would. Sorry.
The sprint race is a third distance, not like it's less
Yeah,
than
a
a half.
third. Sorry, yeah, exactly. It's a third distance, so you're not allowed to use a tire that you use on Saturday on Sunday. So there's a lot of variables that Formula One can create using tire strategy itself, which could spice up the results on Sunday, forcing teams to think about the weekend as a whole instead of just concentrating on winning one event at a time and then moving on to the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. Your trial idea is like very interesting topic, but for me, the 2021 proposal does not work on based on its fundamental, which is the quali race, which means, so what they are proposing is you do a qualifying on Friday evening, which replaces the FP Friday, yeah, Friday evening, which replaces FP2, and you do a quali run based on that qualifying results. Now we know Valtteri Bottas and Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen and now Sergio Perez will be the top four in at the start of the sprint race, like most of the time. And if they start top four, they'll most likely finish top four bar any incidents in the sprint race, which means that gives them additional points. So the winner gets 12 points in that race. Now, if Lewis Hamilton gets pole, he starts the sprint race in first. He wins the sprint race, gets 12 points, and he starts the feature race on pole, and he wins the feature race. That's 25 points for a perfect weekend. Today he sorry, that's 37 points for a perfect weekend. Today he gets only 25. So, and it's the the in the sprint race the points are given out only for the top 8 positions, so which means that the Haases and the Williams have even less of an opportunity to get those points. So I don't really like the fundamental of this.
I mean, yeah, absolutely, I agree with you there. But what I'm trying to say is, let's not lose all hope. Let's hope FIA, F1 can come up with something interesting. They can throw in a wrench there that changes things up a little bit and spices up the racing, hopefully. But let's not talk about some other ideas from other championships and some random ideas that we've had about how we can have a more exciting race weekend. So I'll throw to you first and hear out what you have to say.
All right. So, firstly, I think the Formula E system, with a few tweaks here and there, is a very exciting and potentially a very leveling system. It levels the field out a lot, and even though the Formula E system has had a lot of backlash from the Formula E drivers themselves, because the faster drivers get stuck behind in the midfield. But I suppose that is what we are looking for, because that creates exciting races, right? So
Yeah, but before you dive into it, before you dive into your your arguments on why we should do that, or why F1 could do that, let's just tell our listeners what the Formula E racing qualifying format is. I know we have said that before in our other episode, but let's just reiterate it. So basically, in Formula E qualifying, the drivers are divided into groups. I think there are four groups of drivers, of six drivers each, based on the championship order. So your first six drivers in Group One, your next six drivers are in Group Two, and so on. And then the drivers go out on the track for qualifying based on the championship order. So like Group One drivers will go out first, and so on and so forth. So what this does is the drivers who are ahead in the world championship, who have more points, go out on a track that is green. So the track conditions are not optimal. There's not enough grip on the track. So theoretically, they'll post a slower time, and drivers who go in the end, towards the end of the qualifying, they'll have a much better they'll have better track conditions, and they'll be able to post a faster time. Now, this definitely um, gives them an advantage and mixes up basically the order. But the thing is, there's a Super Pole qualifying after that. So the top six drivers from the four groups will go ahead to Super Pole, and then there'll be another one lap shootout basically for whoever's the fastest drivers. And there's points for qualifying first in your grid. There's a single point for that, and there's 3 points for the person who finishes upon pole position, or like who qualifies fastest in Super Pole. Um, so yeah, now I guess before you go on to saying why Formula One should do this, the biggest backlash for that system has been the fact that you're basically penalizing drivers who have done well in the championship,
yes, exactly.
and that has been the sticking point for all drivers in Formula E.
Yeah, so that, yeah, you're right. And punishing success is not our goal right here, right? We talked about it before. So let's talk about Formula E's old system. Now, Formula E's old system had, like, they made the groups based on a random draw. So it was completely random. It did not punish success. It was your luck. You could get the first group, you could get the last group, and that was absolutely like a leveling field for everybody. So that is that is a option. But
Absolutely,
the thing is, Formula E, the thing with Formula E qualifying and the backlash around it is that Formula E tracks are too narrow to overtake. Even though the cars can follow, but overtaking is still very difficult. And a lot of the times people make contact, right? So, but Formula One has much wider tracks, and they should be able to overtake. But that is the issue with Formula One right now. The cars are not as such that they can overtake. So that, I think, beats the whole purpose and brings back the group qualifying format to what Formula E is facing. The backlash around it.
yeah, absolutely. And then again, like you said, we can't penalize success. But I think the lottery system was still accepted because of the fact that it was luck of draw, and that allowed things to change from race to race, and you couldn't really blame anyone except
Your
the
luck,
random generator,
yeah.
the random grid generator. And I think Will Buxton in his previous video that came out recently also proposed something similar, where he proposed a single lap qualifying, but in the championship order, like Formula E does it, except he didn't talk about dividing the drivers into groups and then sending them out. He just said one lap qualifying, you go in the championship order. The driver who's first in the championship gets the worst conditions to set his fastest lap in, and the driver last in the championship gets the best conditions to set his fastest lap in. And again, he also pointed out the same thing, that this definitely in a way penalizes the fastest car and the fastest driver on the grid, which we're not exactly in favor of, but uh, I guess we sort of needed to mix things up in F1 too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. So, but I think there's something interesting, that we can do with the current format that has been proposed by F1, and I'm gonna draw on that from WRX. So WRX
All
is
right.
World Rallycross Championships
Yeah.
for those, and it's going to be a mix of what Formula One has proposed and what WRX does. Now, for those who don't follow WRX, um, it's it's a very entertaining series, and their races are like really short, and it's a little different format on how you score points in WRX. So the qualifying WRX happens in heats. So again, you have usually 14 or 16 drivers who are divided into groups of five, and then the five drivers go out and they have like a 4 lap race. However, in the heats, which basically is qualifying for the WRX series, you don't get points or for finishing first, second, or finishing based on position. You don't get points based on where you finish in the race. You get points based on what is the fastest lap that you post in that heat, and then basically the driver with the fastest lap over all the heats, across all heats, gets 16 points, all the way down to 1 point, and it's spread across all 16 drivers, and the top 12 um, drivers from all the heats, they move on to semifinals and finals. But obviously for semifinals and finals, the points are decided based on where the drivers finish in their respective races. Uh, so now WRX gives points for whatever fastest lap you have. Whoever posts the fastest lap. But what I would like to propose is a mixture of what WRX does with their fastest lap, and how the drivers move on, and how the grid is decided for the semifinals and finals, to what Formula One has proposed of awarding points for the sprint race, basically. So what I'm proposing is do what Formula One is doing, but make an addition that you decide the Sunday starting grid based on the fastest laps set by drivers during the sprint race on Saturday. So you have your qualifying, you have your sprint race. You still get points of finishing first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth. But the grid on Sunday is decided by the fastest lap times posted in the sprint race. Now, I'll tell you why this idea works. Firstly, we're not penalizing success. We are just making another qualifying session within the race that is going on. You're still giving out points for whoever wins the race, whoever does well in the race. And secondly, you'll get a mixed grid on Sunday, because we've seen, even in the regular format that we've had so far in F1, we generally don't see Lewis Hamilton or Valtteri Bottas or Max Verstappen post the fastest lap of the race. We usually see the driver who's in fourth, fifth, or sixth, like Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris, or one of these guys will post the fastest lap of the race at the end, at the very end, at the very last lap of the race. After having driven on those tires for 30 odd laps, or sometimes making a pit stop, which might not be the case uh, in the sprint race, but that might give an opportunity to teams lower down the order to make a pit stop and go for that fast lap within the sprint race. Now that might be up for debate whether that is fair or not, and whether teams should be allowed to have a pit stop within the sprint race. But it definitely will spice things up, in my opinion. What do you think about it, Vedant?
Yeah, that's a very interesting idea, and I agree to every aspect of it, in my opinion. And it's essentially what the Asian F3 series had. They had three races, but if you remove race three, so what they had for race one and two is essentially this only. So they had a qualifying. The grid for race one was set from that qualifying, and the grid for race two was set from the fastest laps of race one. But in that, they gave points for the finishing order of race one, but the grid was set, uh, the grid was set from the fastest laps.
Yeah, and that is exactly what I'm trying to propose for F1. And we saw how things got spiced up in Asian F3 too, right? We had Guan Yu Zhou and Kushmani, not Kushmani, sorry, Jihan Daruwala leading the championship after the first couple of rounds, and then we had Pierre-Louis Chauvet come back from behind, not much behind, but like come back from behind and take the championship away until Guan Yu Zhou finally came back in the fifth round's last race
Yeah,
to win the championship,
and
and it created some.
Kushmani had an incident in the first race, and he ended up posting the fastest lap in that race. He was supposed to start the second race in P2, but he had a gearbox issue and couldn't race. But that's beside the point. The point is that does create a lot of mixed grids, because drivers further down the line can get have the opportunity to post faster laps. That what it also provides is, in my opinion, another like argument against the current proposal, is that if you give value to the sprint race, if you give value to winning the sprint race, the value for the feature race, for the Sunday race, goes down. So if you don't give value, like what you said, winning the sprint race does not have any value right here. The only value and the only points you are getting is from your fastest lap from the sprint race, right? So like devaluing the win on the sprint race retains the Sunday feature races value, and you will only have one Grand Prix winner at every weekend.
Yeah, that is true. But then it takes away from this, because if you take away points from the Saturday sprint race, you're essentially making it another qualifying session, like a 30-minute qualifying session or whatever, right? And you can't do that. You still, to be able to make things up, you'll have to have two objectives. If you have a singular objective, then all teams will go for that, right? Um, they'll try to space out the cars. They'll still do the one third race distance, but then they'll try to space out their cars and try to keep posting fastest laps and whatnot. So I think that is not helpful. So I think we still need points for the sprint race. But what we can also do, and what something people haven't been talking about, is what F2 and F3 feeder series does. Now I know, and even Will Buxton pointed this out. The biggest problem with Formula One is we still want to have our spectacle event, which is the Grand Prix on Sunday.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas in F2 and F3, you have your qualifying,
Feature
you have
race.
your feature race, and then you have your sprint race, which allows you to play around with whatever happens on sprint race, and people don't care about it as much. But we want people to care about both, like all three things. We want people to care about qualifying, we want people to care about sprint races, and we want people to care about the Sunday race, right? So what F2 and F3 do is they also give points for qualifying, which in a sense it balances out the reverse grid situation that happens in the sprint race, right? So if you get points for qualifying and you win the race, you have basically more points in the bank uh, to start behind. And even if you don't make up those places, you're still scoring some points in, if you end up between P1 and P8. So that offsets the penalty in performance that you're getting basically at the start of the sprint race. So
Yeah,
I don't know why Formula One has not considered that.
yeah, you're absolutely right. So the reverse grid sprint race is up for debate. Obviously, the teams don't want it. We have seen drivers like George Russell. Like George Russell has said it repeatedly that he doesn't want reverse grid races, even though he's in a Williams. So, but as you said, I think offsetting that advantage of getting those points is very important. And as we pointed out earlier, that if Lewis Hamilton starts the race in the starts the sprint race in pole and gets those 12 laps, it's absolutely against the motive of what Formula One is trying to do.
Exactly, you're just giving him a bigger bag of points at the end of the day. But
Exactly.
again, like I said, if you do reverse grids, I know Formula One has ruled out reverse grids, and Stefano Domenicali has said that F1 is not looking at doing reverse grids. But again, things change. And if they ever consider it, I think offsetting that by having points for qualifying will definitely help the cause, and it'll still keep the teams interested, in my opinion. Uh, but yeah, I'm gonna throw it out to you again. Do you have any other ideas for how we can make our weekends more exciting?
Okay, so we have talked about reverse grids, and we have talked about like the Formula E and the sprint race format. Another thing that I have in mind, which we used to have in the 2016 format that we had, but it's not as harsh as that. It's a little bit mixed. That you send the cars out, have a 1 hour qualifying, send the cars out, and you eliminate four cars or five cars at the end of, let's say, 10 minutes, and then you eliminate another four or five cars at the end of another 10 minutes. And like, I don't know how the divisions will be
So
made.
you're basically saying don't give the teams time to prep the cars from one qualifying session to the other.
Yeah, I'm saying
Basically,
don't have separate qualifying sessions. Like, there's only a 1 hour qualifying session, and it won't be like the 2000s when drivers didn't go out and they waited for the end, the 90s. But it won't be like the 2016 session where it was.
where it's way too rapid.
Yeah, so I think,
Exactly.
like,
Yeah, yeah. That's what I'm saying. Basically, what you're doing is you're telling, hey, we're gonna have 10-minute sessions of qualifying where five drivers get eliminated after every 10 minutes, except you don't get a break. The teams don't
yeah,
get a break
yeah,
because
yeah,
right now
exactly,
that's what's happening. Right? So it's
exactly.
basically you're putting more pressure on the teams to keep delivering.
Keep delivering, yeah, consistency. So you can't have a,
Exactly.
so like, we see in the Q3 right now, the drivers do 2 laps. The first lap they do is kind of a warm up lap to get the systems right and get the breaking points and everything right. And the second lap, which they end after the checkered flag has dropped, that is their main lap. So it won't be like that. It will be consistently performing on top of the game.
Exactly, and I guess what you're going for, if I'm reading it right, is like putting more pressure on the garage, or like on the pit stops, and have getting those tire changes quickly, making sure you're like, re- and and that might even take refueling out of the equation, right? Because refueling is not allowed, so you'll have to start the first 10 minutes, let's say, with like a larger fuel load, and
Yes,
deliver on like a larger fuel load, and as time goes on, you need enough fuel in your car. Uh, if you don't have time between sessions, get your car in the garage and refuel it and get it back out.
absolutely.
So
Yeah,
I think that's definitely interesting, and that'll put a lot of pressure on the teams to keep delivering, and I think that creates greater chances for teams to mess things up. I guess to not put the right tire set on the drivers, to forget some things, to have the drivers out in the wrong track position, and so on. So that's definitely interesting, I'd say, and I think that's something that Formula One can try out without much hassle, without a lot of change in regulations per se. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Anything else beside like around that you want to talk about?
I had another thing in mind, which is elimination race quali. So you have a, like, I think it is derived from Will Buxton's idea that you have a race, and every lap or every 2 laps, the last the person in last gets eliminated. But again, if you want to have something like this, you can't have it in reverse grid, and so it's a little bit complicated, so I won't get into it.
Yeah, I think again it falls flat on the fact that you can't expect a driver to they, since you're doing it in the reverse grid format, so you're basically giving the top driver and the top car one lap to make one overtake each lap.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't think
It's
it's the best thing to do, and especially if it's a race. The drivers up front are going further and further away as you're running out of laps. So yeah, again, it falls flat on the face when you think about you're punishing success. You're not letting the drivers qualify where they would have. All right. Let's talk about a couple more qualifying formats from different racing series. Let's talk about IndyCar a little, because I know you mentioned this before we sat down for the podcast, and IndyCar also gets like a lot of stick for the qualifying format they have. Well, not a lot, but like it's still a little questionable the way they do it. So do you want to explain to us like what the IndyCar road course qualifying format is in particular?
all right. So yeah, so what IndyCar does is they take your practice session times and they divide you into two groups of, like, two equal groups. So both the groups go out one after the other. They have 10 minutes, and you set your fastest lap you can. After that, after that, the top 12 teams qualify.
The top 12 drivers
Yeah,
qualify.
so sorry, the top 12 drivers, which is six from Group A and six from Group B.
So it's not like Formula E where it only depends on the time. It depends
No, no.
whether you
Yeah,
have like a top time from a like from that group. So you have to be in the top six of Group One or Group Two.
exactly. So even if the winner of Group B is, faster than, sorry, even if the
Slower than
slower than Group, the like the
Group One's Group A's 10th position
yeah, so
driver.
but they'll still qualify, and the people from 13 and below will get, so the left side of the grid will get, like the even side will get Group A, and the odd side will get Group B, and so something like that. So then you have the segment two, which is the top 12 teams go out together for qualifying runs. They put the fastest laps, and the top six qualify
And there's
for
basically
the,
Q3 again.
yeah, Q3, and that's the fastest lap shootout. So
So yeah, that again, I guess like the sticking point in that is the fact that even if you're faster, in a certain group, if you're faster than the seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th person, or like if you're seventh, eighth, ninth, or 10th, and if you're still faster than the first person or like the top six of the other group, you still don't get to qualify,
yeah, exactly.
and
That
that
that's a little strange, but that again mixes it up, I suppose.
yeah, that definitely does mix it up. But then, uh, it I guess it still works with IndyCar because most cars, like most teams, are like pretty close based on
Yeah,
performance.
yeah, you're right.
So uh, it so a lot of it plays into the driver's hands, and I guess it would work for the F1 midfield. But having like we all know which teams are the best and which teams are the worst. So I guess you could pick the teams like the groups at random, but again, like the results would be pretty evident for Q2 and Q1, which is the case even now. But I don't think it really enhances the racing much more than what our current qualifying does.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a little strange, but again, IndyCar is essentially a spec series, so they can have it, and they don't have much problems with it.
Exactly, exactly. Um, what are some other racing series that we can look at? You know, draw some ideas from them.
I think VEC and all these endurance series have a pretty straightforward format. They give sufficient time for each car to put a few racing laps, a few flying laps, and they qualify based on that. So it's not very gimmicky. And of course, it's not very gimmicky because the racing is quite competitive, and they don't need gimmicks to manipulate that.
Exactly. Well, since it seems we've run out of what I would call, um, you know,
Ideas.
no, 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 no. I'm not out of ideas. I'm not at all out of ideas.
Okay.
What I would call,
Sane ideas.
sane ideas. Yes, exactly. That's the what I was. Uh, we've run out of sane ideas. Let me propose some insane ideas for F1. They're not out of question, but they're definitely different and something that will require a lot more work and a lot more thought than just proposing it. Um, the first idea I had was again from WRX. I got hooked on WRX a couple of years ago, and I've been watching it for a long time now. I watch it a lot. Is that of a Joker lap?
Interesting. Oh,
And so you could have a Joker lap in F1, and since WRX races are only like 4 races long, and you have to do like 4 laps long, and you have to do like one Joker lap, and since the Formula One races are over 50 laps, I'd say you'd have like 2, 3 Joker laps throughout the race, and you could also draw a parallel between having a Joker lap, which again, uh, I guess let's talk about just having the Joker lap first. So what the Joker lap would do is basically it would add an element of strategy. Now we've seen how race position is important at a lot of tracks. Like race position is really important at Hungary, at Imola, at Monaco.
Monaco. Yeah.
So at all of these places, track position plays like a very important role. So it throws another element of strategy in the race. Now there's one step further we can go with this idea of Joker lap. Now we know Formula E uses attack mode. Now, and for attack mode, you have to go off the racing line, go between sensors on a particular path, and then come out. So what if we combine these two, and then once you do that in Formula E, you get a power boost, right?
Yeah.
So what if we combine these two ideas, um, and make it a thing? So maybe the Formula One car goes, does a driver goes, does a Joker lap, and as a result, they get 10% extra battery energy, or they get to use DRS or something like that. Give them like a boost of performance for X amount of time or something like that. What do you think about it?
Yeah, that's a very interesting idea because I have always liked Joker Labs in WRX. They create element of strategy and surprise and excitement, and you never know where that car will come out of the Joker Lab.
And it forces racing.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
forces racing at a lot of times, and it's not inorganic. It becomes a part of racing. It becomes a part of the race, and to me, it's pretty organic.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, the attack mode thing in Formula E is absolutely amazing. I really love it. The going offline, you create a like you slow down essentially and you get a power boost. So and combining those two is pretty like a very optimistic and very exciting thing. Only concern is it's logistically very difficult. So
Definitely, definitely. It'll definitely require all the F1 tracks to add layouts, or change the track layout, do some construction work maybe, or do some surface profiling, or things like that. So definitely, if F1 ever choose to do a Joker lap at most racetracks, it'll require a lot of infrastructural work to get that done. And even
exactly.
like for the teams, they'll have to change software and whatnot to allow for those changes in technical regulations.
Exactly, exactly.
But I think it is something that you can put it out there, and if someone hears it out, maybe they'll take it up and discuss it at least
Yeah, we can always
in the
hope.
F1
We can always
paddock.
hope for the best.
Absolutely. So before I go on to my other crazy ideas, do you have anything for us, Vedant?
I think I'm out of like I don't have a lot of crazy ideas at the moment. Let's continue with what you have.
All right. So, so I guess my other crazy idea was, what if, again, like I guess it's not as crazy. It has to do with again tires and things like that. Um, you know, uh, what if you had to qualify on a single tire? You weren't allowed to change your tire sets at all throughout qualifying. You keep everything the same. You don't do you do or don't do the sprint races. Let's not worry about sprint races right now. Let's just talk about like a simple Formula One weekend where you have qualifying and your Sunday race. What if you had to qualify on the same set of tires all the way through? Q1, Q2, and Q3. Would that spice things up?
That's interesting. That's very interesting because firstly, your tire will degrade over time.
Degrade over time.
So essentially your fastest lap will come on a slower tire. At the same time, your fuel depletes. So your car,
I haven't thought about restricting fuel though.
okay,
Because I know we talked about restricting fuel in your idea, but I'm just saying that you keep qualifying the same, or maybe in the version you said where you don't have a break between basically Q1, Q2, and Q3,
yes,
you just keep going on track. So yeah, you could throw in that too, and you can add the okay, you have to qualify on the same tire throughout all sessions.
yeah, I think that I think we are getting to something here. So let's 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 combine this idea. Let's frame this idea. You have a qualifying session. You go out. All these cars go out. You start on a higher fuel load and a fresher and fresh tires. At the end of let's say 10 or 15 minutes, the
Every 10 minutes, the bottom five cars get eliminated in the position they are in.
yeah, and so that makes teams run go for the runs. They can't sit back and enjoy wait for the optimal track. Then without refueling and without changing
Changing
your
your
tires.
tires.
So at the one hand, your car gets lighter and gets faster, but at the other hand, since your tires are depleting, so theoretically your car gets slower. So that's a very interesting, tire management and fuel management strategy in qualifying itself.
Yeah, and I mean, even if you don't do like even if you still do qualifying the way we do it now in different sessions, if you're not allowed to change, if you're still allowed to like refuel and carry a lower fuel load, I think it might spice things up. The only thing I'm worried about is at least with the current state of the cars, where your Williams is the the deficit to Mercedes that the Williams has is of like 2.5 seconds, and there's no tire in that range that will allow Williams to make up 2.5 seconds. So even if the Mercedes was to go on, the harder tire and qualify on that, theoretically they would still qualify without an issue and beat out Williams. But at the same time, it would spice up things in the midfield. Depending on what the midfield people go and use the
Yeah,
strategy for. Suppose McLaren goes for a medium tire, and now they have to qualify on the medium tire all the way through Q1, Q2, and Q3. They can't go on the hard tire because the pace deficit to teams like to the back markers and other teams is not as great, and they might even be forced to qualify on the soft tire. But in that case, it becomes really easy for Mercedes and Red Bull to just have the fight for P1, P2, and P3. Although it's already easy, because of the pace deficit, but it becomes even more clearer that they'll be the ones fighting for P1, P2, P3, and P4. But I think it'll definitely spice up the midfield though.
absolutely. So, like, what I think is anything we implement, anything Formula One implements, will affect the midfield the most. It will affect, McLaren's and the Aston Martins the most. It won't affect Mercedes. They'll still dominate. Even if, in a reverse grid thing, if let's say Lewis Hamilton starts eighth, he has enough time to rise up to.
I mean, we've seen that happen. I think was it at Monza a couple years ago, or even last year when Lewis fell back to like to the back of the grid, and then he made his way through to like the
Yeah,
top 10.
exactly.
And we've seen Valtteri do that.
Exactly.
We've seen even the Red Bulls. We've seen Max do it so many times. We saw, that too like organically. So we know that they have a pace advantage that the other cars
They
don't
have the
have.
pace to get to the front of the grid, even if they start at the back.
And I think a lot of like this has been like a great conversation so far. But like the few things that we haven't considered in this conversation regarding changing the race format has been things like sponsors, and then TV time, and then how much time are like how much time is each car getting on the track, and the logistical part of it. So that is something definitely that we don't completely know or understand, and that is something for people in the paddock to think about. But we're here just brainstorming more and more ideas for F1.
Yeah, I was actually coming to that on itself. The like if we have the slower cars competing with the faster cars, if we have the Williams competing with the Mercedes, it gives TV time to the Williams, right? It gives TV time to AlphaTauri, to to Alfa Romeo Sauber, and in Formula One, TV time is essential to back sponsors. McLaren didn't have any sponsors a couple of years back. Today they have a lot of sponsors. They have, I think, the most sponsors on the car, and when they get sponsors, they get funding, and that might affect them, and that might help them with the development. So that's one thing. So that is another reason why we need to have that competitiveness on the grid, so that these teams are displayed. These teams get they get TV time. We saw a couple of seasons back, and it was complained about a lot in the community that Carlos Sainz didn't get any TV time because McLaren was not very competitive at the time in 2019 during the start
I
of the
mean,
season.
yeah, that happened with Hülkenberg too when he was for racing for Renault, and he would finish P7 like every race.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So getting that competitiveness and mixing up will definitely help in the racing and in the financial aspect of the sport as well. Another thing I forgot to say at that time, and coming back to your uh, no tire change thing, I think what it creates is like the teams won't be able to go flat out in the final parts of the qualifying, and which is something the fans want to see. You want to see in qualifying, you want to see people go flat out and give their best. So
Yeah, I guess that was one advantage of the single lap qualifying ideas. Get the ultrasounds back, like Will Buxton said, and put them on. Go do like one lap the best you can, and just wait for the results and see how it turns out. But yeah, see the thing is, you can't have your cake and eat it too, like they say, right? And then you can't also choose all the layers in the cake that you want to have. So you just can't have everything. So as fans, as teams, as the whole F1 community together needs to decide what are the most essential aspects of the race weekend, not just the qualifying format or the sprint race format. What are the most essential aspects of the weekend do we need to keep without complaining about, because our biggest complaint has been so far, that we don't have enough racing, wheel to wheel racing. So what are we willing to give up for wheel to wheel racing? What are we willing to give up for that excitement? And I think that is something we as a community need to decide, because we can't have the best of all worlds. There will be a compromise. There will be something that we'll have to give up to get wheel to wheel racing. And there will not everyone can be happy in this situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think 2021 is a very great time for Formula One. We can the sport can experiment with a lot of different formats. I'm not saying have a different format on every weekend, that creates a lot of confusion. But as they are doing it right now, they want to test the sprint race at 3 weekends. So we can test different formats on those 3 weekends, and I would suggest to have it in the beginning of the season, so it does not affect the championship on a whole in the longer term, I suppose.
See, my view on the 2021 season is that COVID has given us a season that F1 should be thankful for, because it has allowed us to finally come to a point when we are ready to experiment. And if we're trying one thing, why not try everything else, right? And
Exactly.
if I think if F1 doesn't grasp this opportunity, this year to experiment in order to make the sport better, I think they'll be passing on a golden opportunity, because I don't think even like myself as a fan would want to experiment when there's like a certain rule change in 22, when there's new cars, because at that time all I want to know is which is the fastest car on the grid, which is the best team on the grid. I won't want F1 to experiment with things that changes things up, and it just confuses me as a fan to know who's like out the outright winner or things like that, right? So I think this is like a golden opportunity for F1 to experiment um, with the sport, and come out on top and make the sport better moving forward, because 2022 is going to be a rule change, and then 3 years later we're going to have another rule change in 25 with the power units. So I think that will be the focus of F1, and I think it is great that F1 has been trying to make it easier for the cars to follow. They've been trying to reduce the pace deficit, make the technology a little more simpler, and I think those are great steps. But I think 2021 can be the the testing ground for something better from like a sporting regulation point of view.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And with the competition we have this season in the midfield, it is it will be very fun to mix things up, and we'll never know who was the fastest car in the midfield, because it doesn't matter who was the fastest car in the midfield. Like we saw last season, McLaren were not the fastest car, but they were the most consistent, and they finished P3 in the championship. We know in 2021 Red Bull and Mercedes will finish 1-2. Whatever experiments Formula One wants to play with them, they can play it. But Mercedes and Red Bull are you know dominant enough to finish 1-2 in the constructors championship. So I don't think it will create a lot of uh, backlash from the teams as such, and the championship will run smoothly. But yes, it's a great season to try and test out things.
Exactly. And before we close, I know we've gone through a lot of ideas on this podcast, but one last idea that I just had, I'm gonna put it out there. It's not a great idea, but just food for thought again for the listeners, for us. What if the teams, so like we talked about single shot qualifying, right? Where you just go out, have a lap, and then come back. What if instead of doing it uh, one driver at a time, you had to do it one team at a time, and the delta between the two cars had to be within 4 seconds or within 5 seconds, which means one car would have to follow the other regardless of of when they go out qualifying, which would add another element to 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 the whole qualifying thing, because we know right now, like drivers try to catch a toe on a lot of circuits like Monza, Spa, and things like that. But and they don't want to be too close to the car. They don't want to be between like 3 and 4 seconds, because that's when the wake of the other car really hampers the performance of the car following it. So they're usually between like a 5 and 7 second window. But what if you take that away? What if you force the two cars to be able to follow? That I feel that will automatically, encourage the teams to build cars that are easier to follow because they'll be forced to follow each other during qualifying in order to qualify better at a higher up the grid.
Yeah, absolutely. Like when you, it might be tough to police that qualifying that format, but at the same time, it's a very fun format, and
It shouldn't be too
like
hard to police, because we already have timers on all the cars at all points in the race, and you can tell the instantaneous difference between two cars at any given point of time during the race. So you just have to use the same thing during qualifying and make sure the two cars are within a 5 second delta or like a 4 second delta um,
yeah,
with each
I meant
other.
that, like, there'll be a lot of penalties given out. I suppose due to that.
Oh, well, there's always sporting regulations to follow, and there's always technical regulations to follow. So if you follow it right, you won't get the penalty, and
Yeah,
that's how you go race. So yeah, um, I don't have any other crazy ideas. Is there anything from you, Vedant, before we wrap up this podcast?
yeah. I don't think I have any crazy ideas, as I said, but at the end of the day, I think we need to create, Formula One needs to create a more competitive grid. Apart from the technical point of it, we need more. The sporting element should be there.
Exactly.
Like a team dominating a sport is not fun for anyone except the team and the fans of the team. So, like, I hope, even though 2022, the regulations in 2022 aim to rule all this out, and
Aim to change that. Yep.
yeah, and we won't even need these, ideas and these weekend formats if that happens, if the racing is competitive in 2022. But for now, like, if we experiment 2021, we can use those tested ideas.
Exactly, Vedant. Exactly. And I'm so glad we had this conversation. I was bursting with all these ideas, and I just had to get it out there, and I've finally been able to do it. So thank you so much for listening to me and my crazy ideas. And those who are listening, please, please, please put your ideas in the comments below, and we'll do another podcast where we take your ideas and discuss them on here for you to listen and what we think about it. So please let us know what you think of our ideas and what ideas you have for F1 alternate weekend formats. And yeah, thank you for listening once again. Thank you, Vedant, for being here, and we'll catch you on the next one.